Jason Pryor is founding partner of the master planning and urban design practice, Pryor and Partners, and he's been working on a number of key sites in London, including Silvertown and Euston. He was formerly chief executive of building and places at AECOM, where he led the master planning team for the London Olympics. And as it's NLA's 15th birthday this year, we're currently showing an exhibition on the changing face of London, which looks at the amazing changes which have taken place in London since 2005. So Jason, you played a key part in the planning for the Olympics, which is the poster child for this transformation of the capital. Compared to other major cities around the world, how well do you think we handled this growth spurt?
I think we've done reasonably well. My sense is that you know, coming off the back of the Urban Task Force reports, of the work of the urban regeneration companies around the country, there was and is a fair depth of experience on how to do these big, complex regeneration exercises, and that's both a sort of physical change and the sort of socio-economic change that goes with it, probably more important part of it. So I think we're getting better at that. I have to say, I think my sense over the last 5-10 years or so is that we've lost our way a bit. I think we're maybe all of these cycles crest at some point, and there's a need to go back and look at the fundamentals. And of course, the situation we find ourselves in the world, but particularly in the UK at the moment, relative to COVID, is probably a very good time for reflection, and put that in the context of climate change as well. We know we have to change what we're doing. So I think not bad, but I think a declining level of effectiveness around some of these issues, and certainly time for rethink.
Clearly, as you say, COVID-19 will have a substantial impact on how we live in cities, and this, I guess, is a massive opportunity for planners to reimagine their form and function. And so, I mean, how do we do that? Because after the Manchester bombings, the city was reshaped and was regenerated as a result, and you were involved in that. So who drove it? Was it the planners? Is it politicians? Is it people, or the executive?
Well, look, I think the starting point is that cities have been around a very long time, and their appeal and their contribution, culture, economy, wider social issues is well understood, and it's a model that works pretty damn well. So I think most of the smarter cities on the planet have a fairly clear idea of their trajectory. And certainly, I think with Manchester in particular, you had an extraordinary alignment between the sort of permanent executive in the city and the political leadership. You know, 20 plus years later, that team is largely still there. So they knew what they were trying to do. The bomb wasn't the first thing to crop up on their radar. Tackled Hume, which was a huge issue. So I think the successful cities have a long-term plan, have a long-term strategy about the betterment of their city for their broader population, the deepening and strengthening of their economic base, the overall resilience of the city, and they take that forward. And now we start to look at other issues, you know, much more focused on climate change, of course, COVID at the moment. So I think the successful places have got that relationship sorted, and the trajectory and momentum of the bigger plan is usually in place, and everyone's aligned around it. The how you do it, the nuances within that, the prioritization of different issues is always changing. That's political, that's cultural, that's social, but the overarching strategy is usually there, and that's what makes them successful.
But I guess some places change quite quickly, like after 9/11, Lower Manhattan was transformed really from a monocultural business district to a mixed-use neighborhood. And so that changed because rather as now, there were, you know, people moving out to the outer boroughs and to New Jersey, and so they had to really look very deeply at how they organized that particular part of New York.
Yes, and they did change quickly, and they, but I would probably argue that the need had been well identified before that. The problem had been identified. You know, I can speak to Manchester. The reality of a declining retail base, virtually no one living in the city centre, you know, a scary place after dark, was well understood before that IRA bomb. What that intervention gave you was a chance to do something quickly and seize the opportunity, momentum, and broader public focus on making that change happen. And that sort of hiatus in city life gave you the opportunity to tackle that. And so, you know, strangely, in a completely different way, that's what the Olympics allowed us to do in the Lee Valley and in the adjoining boroughs. It was a big moment, a short time scale, but huge focus and delivery. And I think you see that pattern across cities of seizing those particular moments, even if it's, you know, something like a Detroit, where you have a massive economic collapse. And then what do we see now? We all, you know, 10 years ago, we asked anyone about Detroit, the game was up, you know. Now what do you see? This sort of renaissance is starting to flower against a whole different set of assumptions about what city life can be and what's important. So I think these moments of crisis are hugely powerful. Dealing with the day-to-day issues of that crisis, of course, is all consuming for many people, but to break out and take time to then accelerate propositions to understand change. And frankly, I think in most places, the need is well understood. The potential routes to deliver that is well understood. You need that moment and that focus to make it happen.
So the way we organise London today through the London Plan is still driven by, as you mentioned, the urban task force, in contrast to the sort of Abercrombie plan and moving things out to the new towns. Does that, the urban task force model, still hold good, do you think, in a post-COVID environment? Or are we looking at a more dispersed city?
Well, I think, you know, the urban task force was a great piece of work, a lot of great thinking in it, and it changed the way we went at things, and it led to a much more, I think, joined up approach around a lot of these broader regeneration issues, and it brought together practice that we could see all over the place happening, but it sort of brought it into one place and made it clear to everyone. But you know, we're in a profession and a business where the pendulum swings backwards and forwards. So whilst there's great principles in the Urban Task Force report, there is a need to review what happened, to understand the impact it had, and to make changes. You know, cities are this incredible manifestation of human ability and creativity and culture, and that is forever changing. And therefore, you know, 20 years on, you should expect us to be reflecting upon that and changing it. And you know, issues of density, use of brownfield land, all of those things have had their time and had their place, and many of those attributes will continue to be delivered. But now I think the review of our public spaces, how our public spaces operate, you know, the Urban Task Force report could never have second guessed what's happening to our retail world and our high streets, didn't second guess the internet, and the Urban Task Force report would never have allowed for you know, the impact of, say, COVID on the office market. So of course there's time for reflection, but it's a pretty damn good solid base to work away from.
But I was looking through the Changing Face exhibition the other day and thinking, why do some areas take much longer to develop than others? And actually it's interesting that one of the reasons seemed to be that they were master planned. If you look, for instance, compare something like King's Cross, which has been a huge success, with Nine Elms. King's Cross was the first plan for that, was delivered by Norman Foster back in about 1987.
Yeah, I remember.
But for instance, Nine Elms, which is actually, it has an outline plan, but it's not really master planned, was first announced in 2009 and is almost complete now. So actually, master planning does seem to actually hold things up. As a master planner, how would you respond to that?
Well, you know, it's a dreadful profession, and it's certainly not for driving economic vitality. So, no, look, but what's the better place? You know, what is the most successful of those two schemes? What's the one we're celebrating on the international scene? What is the one that has already become a reference point for good practice in London and across multiple European cities. So, you know, I think a couple of things sit behind some of those arguments. You know, where there are big underlying issues in terms of ground conditions, just the technical challenge of getting some of these projects done, when these projects are aligned with, frankly, expectations of big value returns, they tend to require a lot more thinking about. And frankly, when projects are put forward under a high level of scrutiny with high expectations about outcomes, be that both at a local level or a broader political level, they do take time. I would argue, though, that when they're done well, they generate value across a whole broad spectrum of city life. And I think those two examples you put up give you all the reasons, I think, why you need to take your time sometimes and do these things properly.
So one of the areas which is having the hardest time at the moment in London is the central activity zone, which of course fed off the idea of agglomeration, where people would come together, share ideas and sound off ideas against each other. So do you think agglomeration is still an important let's say economic aspect when we have Zoom like this, where we can do business so far reasonably successfully?
Yeah, and I think it's, in your phrase, reasonably, and I think it works for a while, but certainly us as a practice, I think I described it as we have one charrette room and about 40 offices at the moment because everyone's sitting at home doing their thing. But you know, last week we were in the office because we're kicking off a fairly complex project, and we just need to sit down and talk and work on stuff together, and it's a bit difficult to do it through these mediums. So I think I think, be it through flood, pestilence, wars, bombings, you name it, cities, their time has always come to an end. Their death has been foretold on many occasions, and here we are, sort of 4,000 or 5,000 years after the first one, still carrying on going. I think cities offer so much in terms of answering the broader human condition that they will survive. The way we work in them, what they do, how they service the broader population, as we spoke to earlier, will undoubtedly change. But I think we will still be meeting and collaborating and you know, being human for many more years to come. I think all these tools we've all learned to use are fantastic. And you know, I suppose whilst COVID has been, you know, it's a huge impact for many people, the big existential crisis out there is climate change, and the things we've learned to do and our ability to switch behaviours extraordinarily quickly under COVID, to me, speak to a lot of things we're going to have to do or should be doing in order to tackle that bigger problem, which is climate change. So if we can maintain the collaboration and the joint working, but at the same time, maybe travel a bit less, maybe not have an office and a home, and maybe we can do more of this from the same place, maybe be more efficient about our use of buildings, all the things that we need to do to make climate change or tackle climate change, then I think the city will survive. I think actually cities will get better, be more enjoyable, and we need to ride this one out because there's a bigger set of challenges ahead of us.
Great. Well, Jason Pryor, thank you very much for answering my questions. Also, thank you for mentioning Detroit. I think it'd be very interesting to have a look and see how Detroit came back from the brink over the last decade or so, as you say, as a very good example of the resilience of cities. So thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome. Take care. Bye.